Our fathers have a massive impact in our lives. Join me and my special guest for this PG-13 episode of Family Vision.
Hi, my name is Emily Rienow. Welcome to Family Vision, the podcast from Visionary Family Ministries, encouraging families through practical, encouraging, and real conversations.
Rob Rienow here with Visionary Family Ministries. Welcome back to Family Vision, and I've got a very special guest I want to introduce to you today. His name is John Finch. He is the author of the book, The Father Effect, Hope and Healing from a Dad's Absence, as well as a movie available on YouTube by the same name, The Father Effect. John, welcome to Family Vision.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Well, I discovered you online, probably the way a lot of other people do, with your ministry to those that have recovered from or are navigating just hurts and wounds from maybe their relationship or the absence of their father. And obviously, I personally connected with that. The Family Vision community knows my story of my parents' divorce and dad's infidelity and all the pain that went with it. But the more I learned about how God was using you to help people heal and recover from struggles they had in their relationships with their fathers. And you do a lot also with dads, helping fathers, regardless of their background, to be the best dads they possibly can be and to have God use them to make a difference in the lives of their kids. I said, man, I got to have a conversation with you and introduce you to the Family Vision community. So I'm really glad that you're here. And I'd love, for starters, for you just to share your story and tell us about your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, my dad committed suicide when I was 11. So for the next 30 years, I just kind of wandered through this world, not really knowing what it meant to be a good son, a good father, a good man, any of those different things, because I didn't have a father walking alongside me, showing me and telling me what that looked like or what that was meant to be. So, I was angry. For 30 years, I was angry, and I covered that anger up with medication through alcohol. I was a social alcoholic and traveled quite a bit. And I was the guy that there was this great Christian guy when he was home, but when he was on the road, it was a whole different ball game. So I played a game there, and I loved that game. It was a high for me, and being two different people, the Jekyll and Hyde, if you will. But really, in the movie and in the book itself, I share kind of the struggles of what that looked like for me growing up without a father, not knowing how to be a father myself, not knowing how to be a husband. So, the journey is one of inspiration and really healing and forgiveness. Ultimately, the real turning point of the story was the forgiveness I came to find for my father, how God showed me that, and how it radically changed my life as a man, husband, and father.
Tell me about your relationship with your dad before he took his life. And by the way, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine the trauma that you went through, but what was your relationship like with him when you were younger, when you were a little boy?
It's interesting. When I was in counseling, and I'm a huge advocate of Christian counseling, I had a Christian counselor named Dr. Tom, and I talk about him a little bit in the movie, and he encouraged me, challenged me, called me out, when I wasn't being totally honest, and just loved on me, but really pushed me to get to various pieces of my story. And he was walking me through this process, right, of healing. And so there was one time he asked me the question, I'll never forget this. He asked me what I remembered about my father. Times just me and my dad, and I had no memories. Not one memory of me and my father, just me and him doing something. And I remember I wept. I cried because it hit me that, why can I not remember one time? I'm sure there were times when I was little where it was just me and dad. I had two older brothers, but I'm certain there were times, but I just couldn't remember them. And that hurt, I think, more than anything, right? When I first started my counseling sessions, I couldn't even say the word dad without weeping because of what that represented in my life. I had this issue and struggle with, and like many people do, of thinking about a heavenly Father that was a gracious, trustworthy, forgiving, loving God when that wasn't my father, my earthly father. There's a piece in the movie where I asked that question to everybody we interviewed, and there was a young man that said, when he was encouraged to pray, Father God, said, I couldn't do it. I could not do it because of what that represented in my life with my earthly father. So there was a lot of those type of things that I struggled with, and just struggling with God and this image of, and I think I gathered the image from all the other, my buddies' friends' dads, but it was this, I felt like he was this judge up there with a gavel, just waiting for what's John going to do next that I need to punish him for, And so I thought he was kind of this angry God that was just waiting to punish me again.
I want to get to back to that in just a second, but as you shared your story before, you talked about anger as like one of the first reactions, and was that through your teen years, college years, beyond? And what did anger for you look like?
Absolutely. I think the abandonment and betrayal. I remember I could not realize how a father, especially when I became a dad, how can a father leave his kids and wife? What kind of man does that? And so I used to refer to my dad as a coward. Just never really talked to him very much. It was interesting after we came out with the movie and people started to see it, and friends of mine, they were like, man, I had no idea, because I kept it a secret, right? I had a couple of friends that I talked very briefly about just various aspects of it, but nothing deep. And so for me, yeah, it was anger. And again, a part of me dealing with that, even starting in high school, was alcohol. If I could escape and medicate and numb myself, then I didn't really have to think about the real issues that I was dealing with at the time with my dad.
And tell me about how this all impacted your mother.
So, my mom, when my dad died in 1979, April 10th, 1979, I think my mom was making $7,000 a year as a general aide at elementary school. But it was amazing. She's the most loving to this day. She's 91 years old. To this day, she's just an angel on earth. I mean, God, she is the most living example of what Jesus was like. She's the most gracious, loving, forgiving, trusting person I think I've ever met.
And you were involved in a church. Your mom was a Christian. You were church attenders.
Yes, so I grew up in church with my mom. My dad would come every once in a while, but not very often. He was gone a lot. He traveled a lot, was constantly gone. He had a lot of different mental health issues, which back in that day, they're not discussed like they are now, but I think he had some major depression, maybe even some bipolar. There was a lot of things going on with him. But yeah, we were there every Monday night for visitation, every Wednesday night, and then every Sunday morning. That's one of the great things that my mom did, is instill the value of church and community worship.
I wonder if you had a similar experience to what I had. My parents divorced when I'm 15. Dad's unfaithful to mom. I had well-meaning Christian friends in my life who cared about me, and there was nothing in any ill will in this at all. But I did get this message, well, Rob, you need to forgive your dad for what he's done. And again, they meant it well, but it just came across very Sunday school-y to me, very pat answery to me, even if didn't really disagree with them. Did you have that experience with what forgiveness even was, like how you were even supposed to deal with that word?
I didn't early on. And again, now I was in fifth grade when my dad died. So through my junior high years, we'd go to church quite a bit. And then when I got into high school, I moved away a little bit more, came up with excuses, I think, not to go. And then when I went off to college, I was like all out, right? I wasn't going to church, wasn't involved, wasn't plugged in, none of that stuff. So I think part of that, though, was just my rebellion toward God. Because here's the issue. I had an anger toward God also, not just my dad. Because I remember thinking, if there is a God, right? If God is a good God, how could he allow this to happen? I think a lot of people kind of think that way, right? I played the victim. I love playing the victim. The victim mentality is like, well, no matter what happened, it was like, well, you don't know what I've been through. You don't know. It was always I was blaming somebody else instead of dealing with the real issue. So at one point got to the point where I didn't care. I didn't want to forgive him because I was mad at him.
Well, tell me about when the Lord started to break through? I mean, you just described for me from 11 through college, kind of spiraling in the wrong direction with alcohol and with anger. And I don't give a rip about this. So when did the Lord start to turn your heart? I don't know if the word is soften your heart, but when did the Lord start to work to take what the enemy meant for evil and start to use it for good?
Yeah, it was around February of 2009. My life had really began to fall apart. And for that time, I had been married quite a number of years, probably close to 20 or so. I just wasn't the husband I needed to be, wasn't the father I needed to be, wasn't the man I needed to be. And there was a lot of things going on. And it was, God took me to a place of brokenness. And it was where he had to take me to get my attention because I was having too much fun running from him. And so there was this time where, the walls just seemed to be closing and everything that could go wrong was going wrong. I had bad health. My in-laws had both come down with cancer. My marriage wasn't good. I mean, there are all these different things. And so it was really in that instance where just about 2 years previous to that, I'd spent some time with a friend of mine. We were neighbors and he was a believer. And we'd have these great long conversations about just the struggles of men and everything we were dealing with. And we were out on a golf course. And I remember we were just talking. And he said, "You grew up without a father, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And I went on to give him this great 10-minute explanation about how amazing my mom is. And he turned to me at one time and he said, "But was she a dad?" And I think that's the first time I'd ever been asked that question. And I remember walking away from the golf course going, "Whoa, what was that?" And I knew that, there was this thing, this disease, this issue I had, but nobody had a name for it. I couldn't go to a doctor to cure it, none of that type stuff. So he went on to talk about the father wound. And when he started talking about the father wound, I was like, yes, that's it. That's it. So for the next 2 years, I literally tried to kind of figure it out on my own, but wasn't real serious about it. So again, fast forward 2 years later, and in February of 2009, that's when everything started really coming together. And I thought back about that conversation. And I thought, okay, you know what? This father wound's the deal. It's my issue. It is the problem that results in all the other issues that I have. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to dig in. And I think for the first time in my life, I truly surrendered, fully surrendered to God and said, okay, Lord, I'm all yours because I cannot do this by myself. I got to have you. And so found a Christian counselor. It was actually in the midst of one of those sessions that I just heard God, not audibly, but within my spirit, just say, "How can you be so bitter, angry, and resentful towards a man who didn't know how to be a father?" Up to that point, God had been showing me my dad for who he really was. And he was a wounded, flawed, imperfect guy, just like myself. And so for me, it was that there was a time period where I was hearing stories from my mom. We started having these conversations we'd never had before. I started talking to my uncle, my aunt, all these different people who knew my father. And what I came to realize is he was lucky to make it to 42. I mean, he had 5 different dads, never a real close relationship with a father. And his mom was, in and out and with different guys. And so he was just struggling. He was dropped off when he was at 16 years old to live in New Orleans all on his own. His mom left with the latest husband who was a truck driver, just said, "Hey, have a good life." So as I began to understand his story, God showed me that he could only give what he had. And it was in that moment that God showed me a forgiveness for my dad. It was understanding his life and the difficulty and everything that went into it, that he just never really had a chance to be a dad. And so ultimately that was it. That was the game changer for me. And that literally is what changed everything about my life, was forgiving my father.
It's so similar in my journey with my dad. The shift from when God shows you the trauma and pain that our fathers came from, and it doesn't excuse their bad behavior or the things that they did that were wrong. My dad's mother died in childbirth with him, and his father already had 2 sons, and his father wouldn't take him. He couldn't take him. We actually don't even really know what happened, but his mom dies, his dad wouldn't take him. And he was a sickly infant. He was premature, and this was 1918, right? So this is a long time ago. So he spent the first year of his life in the hospital with nurses. So no mom, no dad, no grandma, no grandpa, no family. And then he gets adopted by his aunt and his uncle, who were two single people. They weren't married. It was a brother and a sister, aunt and uncle. So never saw a marriage work. And there's all sorts of weird stuff that happened in that family. My dad spends his whole life looking for women to love him. Four marriages, a bunch of other relationships, dies with a picture of his mother on his dresser. That was I'm just responding to your part of your journey too, as God brought all those things to my heart and mind in my forgiveness process, replaced that hatred, anger, bitterness, and resentment with compassion. And one of my favorite scriptures about Christ's ministry is Matthew 9:36, where it says he looks out at the crowd of lost souls, and it says he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And that's something that God had to do in my life to give me more of Christ's heart, really, for my dad, who was a very, very broken person.
Yeah, you know what I think, and this is what I try to encourage men that I deal with, and the women too, right? It's go learn about your dad's dad. What was it that your dad used to do as a kid? What did he enjoy? What was his favorite candy? To this day, I still love hearing stories about my father. There's a bond there, even just through the stories that I think God used to give me a compassion for my dad, because of the abandonment, betrayal. There's a verse, and it was kind of my life verse for many years. I put it on my mirror as I got up every morning. It's the first verse I saw on the fridge. I put it everywhere, and it was Hebrews 13:5. And Jesus said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. And I capitalized never, because of the abandonment, betrayal. Again, I needed to know beyond the shadow of a doubt that God was never going to leave me, because I think that played out in so many different aspects of my life, and does for so many people. It becomes a trust issue, and it becomes a trust issue in relationships. And, there's people that will leave great relationships because of the fear that the other person is going to break up or abandon them first. And so they'll be the first ones to break up because they don't want to be abandoned.
Well, John, we're going to pick this up in part 2, our next episode, but I want everybody to get a copy of this Father Effect book, The Father Effect, as well as see the movie. So tell people where they can get that stuff and see it.
Sure. So the movie is available for free on YouTube. It's just The Father Effect. And then you can get the book on our website at thefathereffect.com.
I love it. Well, we're going to pick up our next conversation, and we're going to talk about some symptoms of father loss and father wounds and action steps. I'm going to ask you, you're a father of 3 daughters. So we're going to talk about the impact of dads on daughters. And we'd love to hear from you. If you've got some prayer needs or you've got some responses to today's episode, you can email me directly. I'd love to hear from you at podcast@visionaryfam.com. That's podcast@visionaryfam.com. If you're looking for one of our live Visionary Family events coming to your part of the country, please visit our website at visionaryfam.com. Click that events button, and we look forward to our next time together with you on Family Vision.